Hey movers, shakers, and the stuck but curious. I'm Freya Gordon, and this is Good Shift, the podcast that helps you figure out what's next in your career and make a move with confidence. If you're feeling successful but unsettled, like you've checked every box but something still feels off, then listen up. You'll want to grab a notepad for this one. I'm very excited to have Lamiaa Laurène Daif here with me in the studio today. Lamiaa is a Stanford GSB graduate, a TEDx speaker, and an award-winning career transition strategist who works with professionals who are high-achieving but quietly stuck. She helps people get clear on what they actually want, build the confidence to act on it, and make the move without blowing up their life in the process. But best of all, she's got lived experience of her own. So when I say she has the tools to help you, you can really trust that she knows what she's talking about. Lamiaa was a private equity director at Europe's largest fund with millions on the table when she walked away. She then became Apple's global strategy lead for Mac and iPad and was selected into their top 70 leadership program. Had equity still vesting, but again, she walked away. Crazy, right? Or maybe she knew something that we don't. 2 major career pivots. The first one nearly broke her. Burnout, a health crisis, a life that looked perfect from the outside, but was falling apart behind the scenes. The second time, she left at her peak, on her own terms, before the breaking point. She'd figured out how to do it differently. Her LinkedIn bio puts it perfectly. You can look successful on paper and still feel a quiet heaviness inside. I know that place. I've lived it twice. In this episode, she's going to walk you through exactly how to identify when something isn't working, name what's really keeping you stuck, and build a step-by-step process to make the shift. If you've ever thought, I should be happy, but I'm just not, Lamiaa is going to help you stop wondering what if and make that shift. Lamiaa, welcome to Good Shift.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Me too. The conversation we had prior to this was just so juicy. I feel like we should have really recorded that too. So hopefully we can bring all those gems up again today for the audience.
Absolutely.
So we'll dive into your experience first and give people a little bit more of an idea about your story and what you've been through. I learned so much just the way that you talked to me about it before. So can you start by sharing more about your journey, particularly the big shifts that you've both been required and chosen to make?
Absolutely. So my first career pivot started when I was 29. So back then I was a director in Europe's largest private equity fund. I was about to get married. I lived in Paris. From the outside, everything looked perfect. My parents were proud and, people were impressed. But inside of me, it was kind of a different story. Sleep wasn't good. I felt constantly exhausted, no matter the amount of coffee or sleep. I never felt actually enough, despite the achievements and the promotions and the titles. And there was just this unsettling thought of, is this it? I worked so hard to get to this point, and yet something feels off. But because the world was constantly reflecting back those achievements, I did what high achievers do. I kept pushing, thinking that I just need to be grateful. And I thought that I was thriving, but in fact, I was just surviving. And sometimes survival wears a very pretty mask until it cracked. And mine did crack. One morning, I woke up and my face was completely deformed, like I couldn't recognize myself in the mirror, and my body was full of hives from head to toe. And after months of tests and doctor's appointment, they realized that I had developed an autoimmune disease. And that was followed by a personal crisis and just going to a job where I just couldn't do it anymore. And so that was my first pivot. The hard way, the body forced way, and it took time for me to rebuild. So I decided to leave the job and take time off, first to take care of my health, and then to ask myself questions I've never asked before, to try to figure out what it is that I wanted. And I absolutely had no clue of what I actually wanted. So I decided to actually go back to school. When I was 30, I went to Stanford Business School to explore and ask those questions that I absolutely had no answer for at that time. And then I pivoted into tech, and I joined Apple. And that was such a big shift. New industry, new role, new place. And I loved it. And I spent 5 years learning and growing and just being in such a beautiful culture. But after 5 years, I decided to leave again and pivot again. But this time it was different. I pivoted on my own terms and I left at my peak before the crisis, before the breakdown. And now I help people do the second time of pivots, the second type. Most of high achievers wait, like I did the first time, until you burn out, until you break down, until you're resentful. But you don't have to. You don't have to wait for that. You can leave on your own terms at a pace that actually works for you.
That is an amazing story, and I naturally have a lot of follow-up questions for that. And it's so interesting that you went through this health crisis, and that's one of the things that somewhat pushed you into leaving. And I think a lot of people listening today probably are feeling the early signs of that, but maybe can't quite identify what those are. So I would like to tap into that. But first of all, I just want to go back to when you're at that first job and you were wondering, is this it? Can you just talk about that feeling a bit more, and what were the things that made you feel that feeling? Was it that you weren't enjoying the job? Was it more that you just were looking down the barrel of doing this for a long time and didn't feel it was sustainable?
All of it, to be honest. So first, yes, it was a very intense job. I kind of knew going into it. It was getting better over the years, but for sure, you work an insane amount of hours, and so that by itself, creates exhaustion. But when you're driven by what you do, when you love it, that transforms into a different kind of energy that is not just draining you. So I was feeling that drain from the hours, but it wasn't just that. It was, when I started, I'm someone who loves to learn, and I had so much to learn. And so, it was kind of like school after school, and that was a fuel. And I was one of the few women who had access to this world. So that competitive side of me was also like, I'm going to prove that I can do it. But at some point, that fades away. That's not enough to keep driving you. And I started realizing that, I was climbing very fast. And as I was like climbing, I was realizing that when I would look up and see my boss, for example, I didn't want that position. I didn't want that life. That was not something that was driving me enough. In fact, was driving me to get promoted was that validation, that recognition that I was looking for. That kept pushing me, but not what that represented. So there was that. Then there was just physical sensations. The Sunday dread, like were real, like literally being like, where did my weekend go? I don't want to go. The number of times I was just waking up Monday morning and just feeling that anxiety for no particular reason, just because it was Monday again. And I knew that, I had to push through for at least 5 days. And then I started also feeling envy for other people. I was looking at, people doing different things, having the courage to build something on their own, or taking a break to figure out what they actually wanted. And I would feel that flash of like, oh, I wish I could do that too. So I'd say it's a mix of all of this. And yet, every time I would feel it, I would push it down, because I am supposed to be grateful, because everyone would kill for this, because it's what I wanted. I worked hard to get there, right? It didn't feel like I was forced. I thought it was a choice back then. And so I had to not only accept, but be grateful and be happy. And as I said earlier, I had no clue of what I wanted to do outside of this. I had identified so much with this job, with this industry, with this identity. It became my identity. Like I was the job. And so thinking of not being that and not knowing what else could be was paralyzing. And so I didn't want to take any step forward because it seemed, I was making investment decisions all day and it seemed such a stupid decision, right? To leave something that not only is good but looks so successful. The recognition was real on every single aspect. The path was clear. Why would I do that unless I'm crazy? So that's what was going on internally, a lot of different things.
I love how you described that, because this is what keeps people so stuck, right? It is such a conundrum. There's so much that we put into early careers in terms of identity, mindset, finances, and then it's so hard to unwind all of that. So let's go to when you left the job.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk us through how you got to that point where you actually managed to hand in your resignation and say, I'm going to leave? Because all these things you've just described make it sound like a bit of an impossible situation.
Yes. So, to be honest, at that point, I had reached a point where I couldn't not do it. I couldn't do one more day.
And was that
physically,
due to your health?
Emotionally, it was impacting my physical health, mental health, emotional health. The environment was unbearable, and I just physically could not do one more day. So I pushed until I could not anymore. I wish it was different and I had, that courage before. But when everything was falling apart, it was my last survival step or choice. Even if I, at that point, it didn't feel like I had one. I had to survive. And so I had to stop.
That makes me feel emotional hearing you say that, because I can just really imagine how awful you must be feeling at that point. So you then took a break, and how long did you take the break for?
So I took a total of 18 months between, the few months to take care of my health and then the year that I spent at Stanford Business School.
Okay, and people might worry about taking that time off.
Yeah.
And that it's going to be a blot on their resume. Yeah. But can you tell me how you, even if it was in retrospect, really view that time off and the importance of that to what you've managed to go on and do?
Yeah, it was so necessary. As I said, like the first few months was just to get back into shape. Because from that empty cup, there was no creativity, there was no energy to even imagine something different. But then when I got to Stanford, it was honestly one of the best years of my life. It was the first time that I had allowed myself to just be, and to just be curious, to just be uncertain, to explore, to not know. And until then, it was my biggest fear, to not be in control. But interestingly, Stanford has a very beautiful culture when it comes to that. I think that's why there's so many amazing and crazy entrepreneurs that graduate from that. It just gave me that permission, the permission to start again, the permission to test and experiment and explore. And that was completely new to me. I was this like perfectionist who had to get it right and couldn't fail because failure was something bad. And during that year, I rewired actually a lot of those limiting beliefs that prevented me from taking that step earlier, and realized over that time that it wasn't that I was becoming someone new or someone different. I was actually during that time letting go of all the things that were not me, that I had learned in college that I had learned from, the rules of how that world in which I, was part of and worked in, taught me to come back to the essence of what it is that drives me, what it is that gives me energy, what it is that makes me feel alive or in flow. And on the other hand, what are those things that I will not do again? I will not be, in this type of environment or doing this type of job because that's not what I want, or that's not where, my impact could be the biggest. And when you create that space, when you take that pause, it's when you can actually reconnect with that, with those signals that were always there. That's what I realized is, all those years when I was feeling the discomfort and the exhaustion and all these little signals that I just, was turning the volume down constantly, trying to put them on mute, they were there all along. I was just not listening. And that space that I allowed myself to take allowed me to relearn how to listen. Because we always know it's just we create this habit of ignoring because ignoring is actually rewarded.
And can you give us a specific example or two of what those limiting beliefs or things about yourself that you had to shed were?
Yeah. So I'll give you three that maybe took me the longest time to let go of, and to be honest, are still present sometime. And it's just, every day choosing differently and reminding myself of what is the reality and what is the learned behavior or belief. The first one was this, the sunk costs fallacy. So this idea that I had invested so much in this path. I had 2 master's degrees in finance. I had spent 10 years. I got to where so many people dream to be. I had carried interest on the funds that I was invested in. Like, it just felt, I just saw the loss of all these investments that I had made so far. And that was limiting because on the other side, there is another cost that I was completely ignoring, which was the opportunity cost. Is all those efforts, chances that I was not taking and that were also costing me. But I was so focused on basically looking backwards to the investments that I've already made versus looking forward to the investments that I could make in my career. The second big limiting belief is, I call it when then trap. So it was constantly thinking that an event in the future will create the perfect conditions for this shift to happen, or that will just remove the pain and discomfort. So for me, it was when I finally moved from Paris to New York, which was, my dream at that time, it will finally make sense. Like, all of this would be worth it. Or, until the next promotion, or after the wedding, or after X, or, there is always that milestone. But the issue is, I would hit those milestones and maybe I would feel some sort of relief or even joy, but it would be fleeting. The day after, the week after, the month after, I was back to square one, having those same conversations with myself at 2 a.m. And then I would say the third big limiting belief or fear was FOPO, so fear of people's opinion. It's actually more dangerous than FOMO. So many of my decisions were driven by this simple question: what will they think?
And who's they for you? And
so they was my parents, my boss, my peers, my friends, literally everyone around me. And, over the years, I realized that I had kind of outsourced my self-worth to others people's validation. And so I was constantly looking for that external validation so I would try to feel a sense of self-worth. And that was probably one of the biggest traps, because people will always have opinions, even those who love you. But these are opinions. That's not what is good for you necessarily. And because I wasn't sharing what I actually wanted, because also I had no clue at that time, even the people who are the closest to you cannot really help you gain that clarity. Only you can. And so these are probably the biggest fears I had to overcome.
Number 2 definitely hit me really deeply. And I think this is maybe related to when you said to me something that your coach asked you, when will enough be enough?
Yes.
So could you talk to us a little bit more about how you've managed to overcome this one? Because I do think it's a really common one, that we are continuously always chasing the next milestone, and I want to know what to do about it.
Yes. That was honestly one of the most powerful questions my coach asked me. And the reason why they did is because we were having the same coaching session for months. I was constantly telling her, one more quarter, one more vesting, one more promotion. And she didn't say that, Lamia, when is enough to push me to quit, but she wanted to push me to be honest. Because, as high achievers, we're so good at pushing through and working hard and being busy and productive. And she helped me understand that sometimes that discipline that we identified so much with and are proud of, or that productivity, is just a smart way to hide. And so her point was to help me see what I was trying to hide, first to myself, but also to others. And what I realized when she asked me that is that I didn't have the answer. And the reason for that is that there was no answer. It was already enough. When you ask yourself that question, deep down, you know. And the reason why we pretend not to know, or we find these sophisticated thesis and responses are always super smart and clever, is that because knowing means you need to act. And taking action, especially when things look good, can trigger a lot of fears, and some that we just discussed.
And I think this leads me to another one of the questions, that do you think that some people use productivity and hard work to avoid the deeper question of whether they're even on the right path? So it feels like this continuous muting that you're talking about, pushing towards the next step.
100%. And I'm such a great example of that. I was keeping myself so busy at work primarily, but also at home. And the main reason for that is that I didn't want to hear what I already know. And I truly believe that we always know. We can pretend not to. Our mind is so, again, clever and powerful in creating these stories and narratives that help us maybe keep us safe or protect us. But the truth is, what you feel in your body is always there. That discomfort, that chest tightening, your jaw clenching, that constant fatigue or nervousness, like these are all signs that are just waiting for you to listen and start that conversation. And by keeping ourselves productive and busy, it's hard to hear, right? And it's just easier to stay on that autopilot in some ways and put everything on mute. But at some point, your body will scream, as it did for me. I put it on mute for years, and at some point, it will stop you, not because it's betraying you, not because it wants to punish you, but because it wants to save you. It wants to tell you the truth, because it's not sustainable. And again, it doesn't mean take a leap, quit your job from one day to the next. I don't believe in that. That's terrible advice. a pivot or career transition is prepared, and it takes time to prepare it. And so that's why the earliest you can have that honest conversation with yourself, the better you're going to feel. And you can put that energy, that productivity, all those amazing skills that you have and that you naturally have developed in service of what's next, versus looking back and trying to protect these things that you already have. They're not going to go away. Nobody's going to take them from you.
This is so amazing. I feel like it's a really good career therapy session for myself and hopefully a lot of other people listening. So I think it's really good to go to your experience at Apple. I want to understand how you walked away from that and how you started this conversation you're talking about having with yourself.
Yeah, leaving Apple was in some ways a complete different story than my first pivot, and yet there were some commonalities. So it was different because, leaving something that's bad is easy, or easier. Easier. Because everyone gets it. A bad boss, a toxic culture, burnout. It makes sense in dinner parties. Everyone gets it and supports you. But when things are good, if not great, it's really hard to justify, to others and in some ways to yourself as well. And at Apple, everything was not only good, everything was perfect. I had nothing to complain about. But I had learned through the first pivot that pivots take time, number one, and number two, you need time to prepare so that I do it with confidence, and I do it with ease, and I do it with peace, and not wait for that breakdown or for that crisis. But it wasn't easy because there was no villain, and I couldn't point my finger to, I'm leaving because of this. No, it's harder to explain. But what I realized through this journey is actually how wonderful it is to leave at your peak. If you think about it, leaving at your peak, your confidence is at a maximum. Your network and relationships are amazing. You have so much energy to be creative, to drive something new, to build something from scratch, or to join another industry and learn. We're just wired to think that endings are bad, no matter the nature of the ending. And so you should push as much as you can. But beginnings are wonderful, right? Especially when you create that beautiful creative space for them to happen. And so at Apple, nothing was broken. But I had started early this time testing things that I felt naturally drawn to. So I shared my story in a TEDx talk. I didn't go with a full plan of, becoming a keynote speaker, but I did it because I felt really called to share that story that I had started sharing and feeling that it resonated so much. And I wish someone had shared it when I was going through it. And so I just took that first step. And then I listened to feedback. I got data back. And then that talk led to being invited to another talk, and then another talk. And I started, and I kept checking with myself. How does this feel? This feels amazing. This feels fulfilling. This feels closer to what my purpose, whatever we want to call it, looks like. And I just stayed attentive to what was going on inside of me. And that same for coaching, And so it didn't happen from one day to the next. There was no big aha moment. Usually people ask me that, was there one morning you're like, no, it took 18 months at least of discussions, and internal, but also with my coach and with some of my friends who were going through the same things. And at some point, I decided to go on a solo trip for a few weeks to India to meditate. And again, I created that space that I mentioned earlier, that quiet space, because there's just so much noise around us, on what we should do and all the advice that people give on LinkedIn and Instagram and on YouTube and people around you as well, right? It's hard to hear that signal, right? Like your intuition, that thing that is very subtle. And so when I created that space, it was just so clear. And I didn't have a full plan yet, but at that moment, I gave myself permission to start planning.
And what was clear to you when you went to India? Like, what was it that you saw?
I could stay at Apple forever and have a beautiful career and not be miserable, be actually happy, some sort of happiness, because I love the people, I love the work, I love the company. There's nothing to complain about. But then when I started allowing myself to be honest, and I actually asked myself 3 things. One, I asked myself, let's imagine we're 5 years from now and I am living my dream life. I let myself like deeply imagine the details of this life. Not what title do I have, but literally, what time do I wake up? What do I do when I wake up? What do I do the first hour? What do I do the second hour and third hour? Who's around me? What type of work do I do? How proud am I of myself? And I started just like letting myself visualize this ideal life. When I opened my eyes, Apple was not there. Apple was not in that vision. Not because something is wrong with the company, but because that version of success, I actually had outgrown that. And then I asked myself, now imagine having a conversation with my 85-year-old self. She's so wise, she has nothing left to lose. And I'm asking her, do you regret leaving Apple? And not 1 second she would respond, yes. What she would regret is not trying. What she would regret is not listening to this pull that I was physically feeling every time I would be on stage, I would coach someone, I would like just experiment these things that I felt called to. And finally, I asked myself, does this feel me? Not that does this feel good, because it did feel good, but does this feel aligned to that vision that I have? And the answer was not anymore. It was for a certain time, but not anymore. And so the longer I stay, the farther I'm actually getting from that vision. And so that's when I decided it was time to start planning, and have that conversation with my boss, and also give the team time. When you leave completely burnt out, it's hard to build a transition that is beneficial to everyone. And for me, that mattered, because this company gave me only the best, and I wanted to leave in great terms.
So many questions from this. We'll go to the one that is top of mind from when you left. What was it like handing in your resignation and sort of going through that process where you actually solidified it at that point? Because you'd been really well prepared, as you talked about. Did you feel really ready for it, or did it still feel like something that was like you were sort of handing the paper over but pulling it back?
Yeah, the fear was there. I'm not gonna lie, and the fear will always be there. I think it's not about being fearless, but I knew it was not sustainable, because I was literally working 7 days a week nonstop. I was doing my 9 to 5, and then on evenings and weekends, I was doing the rest. And the goal is not to build a life where I burn out again. When those fears would happen, one, I would try to be very specific. So what it is exactly that I'm scared of. Is it fear of regret? And how does that look like? Is it fear of being a beginner again? Because when you've been an expert, and I had that both times, when you spend enough time and you're really good at what you do, there is that fear of like, oh my God, like I feel like I'm stepping back. But the why I was leaving was so clear.
Yeah, and I like that you've referred back to that sunk cost fallacy, one of the things that you had to get through. So what about for the people that don't have a pull to something different like you had, but they're still feeling off in their job? What are the first steps that they should be taking because it's very hard to prepare for what's next if you have a big void in your mind of what that is.
Absolutely. And I can absolutely resonate with that, because the first time there was no answer. I actually knew what I didn't want anymore, because it was so obvious. I didn't want to burn out anymore. I didn't want, a certain type of culture and environment, but I had no clue what was next. And so it is the hardest step, but also the most amazing. It's gaining that clarity, is moving from that confusion or that gray area. And I'll tell you two things that helped me so much figure that out. Obviously, it is a process, but two tools. One is paying attention to when I felt envy or jealousy. And I know this has, usually like a bad reputation. We should not be jealous or envious, but it's not, turned towards against someone. It's really those moments when you see what you actually want, you're just recognizing it, right? We're all like mirrors to each other. And so I started being really attentive to the moments I would feel that and try to understand why. And then the other thing I really paid attention to, that I also learned the hard way through the body, was how my energy was. When did I feel energized and alive and, losing track of time, like what I was doing, versus contracted or just drained after a certain meeting or type of task or type of interaction. And so those two components, like just initially, you're just paying attention. You're not trying to analyze first. You're like a detective collecting cues, right? So what are those moments that my energy goes up or down? And what are those moments where I feel, I wonder if there is something in here for me? And if so, what could this be? And just literally writing them down for weeks. I was doing that while I was at Stanford. Also when I was taking classes or trying new projects with friends or interacting with different type of people and environment, and just taking notes of how I feel in my body. You start understanding, those themes and patterns start emerging.
So should people be out exploring doing different things so that they can get more data in? Or is this more they can be going to their job and doing what they're usually doing, and they can just be taking out of bits of their life that they're already doing without having to add in new hobbies or whatever that is?
Yes, it's a good question. I would say initially begin with what you have, because right, we want to start reconnecting with what we know. The issue when you're confused usually is not a lack of information. The data is there. It's just being able to see it. And so the step number one is listening to what you already know. And so before adding, that's usually what a lot of people do. And that's not what I encourage when you have a clarity issue, is not to go and be like, let me network more. Let me optimize my resume. Let me start interviewing. Like, no, that's actually execution. But that's the last 10%. That's actually very tactical and pretty easy to do in the process. The first 90% starts with you. Because again, if this transition is about feeling good and building a career that feels good and not only one that looks good, then it's not about being tactical. It's about being strategic and being intentional. And so that space that I talked about is necessary to create, to really observe and really understand what it is that I want initially. Once you start having hypotheses, which is what happened to me in my first pivot, I started thinking, I kind of like see three potential paths. It's not that I hate finance. I just don't want to be in that environment. And I realized that when I decided to be an investor, I wanted to invest in people. And right now I'm investing in huge, multi-billion-dollar companies where the people aspect is not at the center of what I do. So what if I stay an investor but go earlier stage and still use my skills? That was a path. But initially, I wasn't building paths first. I wanted to be crystal clear on why am I where I am right now, what it is that I don't want anymore, then we can add.
Could we go back and talk about how much structure you recommend applying to that? That'd be really helpful.
Absolutely. I did apply quite a bit of structure, to be honest, because when I didn't have one, I realized I was still stuck. So that process kind of like looks like 3 stages. The first one, as I said, is to gain clarity. Journaling was and still is an incredible tool. And to be honest, I do both. I do free flow writing. I just need to get things out. The second big part of the work, and again, it doesn't come after, it's all in parallel, is working on the fears. Because you can have the clarity, you can know where you want to go next, but you can feel stuck just because the fear is so loud or the limiting beliefs are so present. And so the big chunk of the work is to work on those, to be super clear and to name them specifically, to almost try to qualify and quantify them. And then the third big thing is to build a bridge, right? When you're prepared and you break down that leap into small experiments that you test and you prepare before you make that leap. Some people love to jump into the unknown, but most people I work with do not. If you're leaving money on the table, which I've done twice, it is real. But am I prepared? Am I going to run out? What's my runway? So being prepared for all those scenarios in a structured way, I think actually help do that pivot faster and with more confidence.
What's the sort of average time frame that you see for people once they decide that they want to make a change or something feels off, going through that process before they make a change?
So it depends where they're stuck. If it's that initial phase of, I feel that something's off, but I can't put words on it, I just know that something will have to change in the next few months or couple of years. That could take even 2 to 3 years. Sometimes it's because I can't do this anymore. It can go super fast. It can take, 3 months or 6 months from the moment they decide to the moment they actually land the next opportunity. Obviously, there are external constraints that are outside of our control. Example, the job market. But what is absolutely in your control is the process, deciding that you're ready, and then taking those steps and testing them.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. And another thing I'm picking up for people who are going to struggle to go through this process alone, that a coach can be really helpful. How should people go about thinking about when the right time to pull a coach in is?
I didn't get a coach right away. I found a community first. Before I even went to Stanford, I did a program where people who were thinking about career pivot went through a course. And I think that is super powerful. Because usually when you go through those and you feel that you should be grateful because you have something good, and it's hard to share with others. People usually, and I felt guilt, if not shame sometimes. And so finding actually a group of people to do this with and do, some sort of career program together, or just being accountability partners is an amazing first step. Then obviously getting one-on-one, tailored, personalized coaching is amazing because again, we can keep ourselves busy and 5 years from now still be in the same place. And so having support, at least for me, was one of the key ingredients that made my pivot possible.
And in terms of finding the right coach for people, if they want to do that, I think there's a hangover from really bad career advisors from when you're at high school or college. So how should people go about finding the right coach for them and making sure that the coach is actually and well qualified, I guess, to help them properly?
I actually worked with different coaches initially before finding mine. And everyone who started with external things, meaning let's start with your resume, let's start with who you should meet before starting with me, disqualified. Because again, I am not pivoting to keep, work in an environment that's not the right thing, or to not know what it is that I truly want. Again, if this is the type of pivot you want, and if this is the type of alignment and fulfillment that you're looking for, it has to start with you. And so that's pretty simple to ask when you ask about their approach and you're interviewing coaches. I think probably today every coach offers, some sort of like discovery call. I would highly encourage to do that and really take it as like a two-way interview. So really dig into their approach and ask them as well what type of career shifts they helped in the past. Kind of like, some sort of like case studies, and see if you see yourself in those transformations. Like, are these transitions the type of things that, inspire you or resonate with you? And ideally, they've been through some sort of career transition themselves.
That is incredibly helpful. That just makes it feel so much more manageable and appealing to me. So thank you very much for that. I want to dive into some listener questions that we've had come in. So these are a few scenarios, and hopefully a lot of you listening can relate to one or part of these. So the first one, this is a bit of a chunky one, so I'll dive in. I've been in my corporate job for 7 years now after studying at university for 4 years. I'm doing really well. I've been promoted a few times. I work in an amazing office with great people and have a salary that makes my friends' eyes water. I like it, and quite honestly, I really like being great at what I'm doing. But I feel like I'm approaching my limit with getting up every week of the year to do this high output job, staying late at night, week over week. I can't imagine doing this for the rest of my life, especially once I've got kids. But I feel like I should. I want that to be me, the person who's crushing it in a recognized career with the amazing salary. But at the same time, I actually just have a feeling I want to do something else. Please help, haha. So I feel like we've discussed a lot of pieces here already, but if you could bring it to the scenario, it would be a helpful way to break it down.
Absolutely. Yes, and I can resonate with that.
Yeah, it feels like this is a lot of viewers.
We hear you. The first thing that comes to mind is that this person is not confused. They have a conflict. So on the one hand, they kind of like know what they want. They know this is not forever. And on the other hand, part of them is terrified to let it go. And that conflict is, one, absolutely normal. And two, it's also a limiting belief, right? It's reframing it into, I can be successful at what I do and grateful and want something else. And again, coming back to that permission, when you're good at what you do, it can become a trap. Because again, it's easier to leave when you're not great at your job. When you're great, it's what we call the golden handcuffs, right? And golden handcuffs are not necessarily about the money or the title. It can be about that recognition. For me, it was the recognition. It was like just constantly looking for that, great, impressive job. I'm so proud of you. You're doing amazing. Like a dog waiting for that treat, and you get addicted to that. So it does feel like a trap. But what this person is also saying really clearly is they already know that this is not forever. And that's not a small sentence. That's already an amazing first step. So what I would recommend is to keep listening to those signals. Again, they're great at what they do. They're not burned out. It doesn't seem that the shift is going to happen anytime soon, but this is the best time to start planning for it and just start exploring and understanding, what does I can do this for the rest of my life mean? You want to start becoming really specific about the things that you know are not sustainable, the things that you love and want to keep. Example, being great at what you do is amazing. You want to keep that. And just stay in touch with that and start getting more and more specific. We can get stuck in the vague, in the I am scared, I can't do this anymore. But the more specific you are, the more solvable the problem becomes.
I like how you instantly honed in on this listener's piece that they actually do have clarity of some sort and that they're not confused. And that's really helpful to understand. Listener question 2. I feel completely stuck. I work in finance and I don't like my job. Actually, I hate it. But I have no idea what else I would do or how to make a move. My skill set is firmly embedded in this job and I feel like I've worked hard to get paid well, but it sucks and I don't know what the next steps would even be to think about making a change.
That was me again. It's really, every time it strikes me like how common this is, how common these fears are, and how common these situations are. I had that same false belief that I was operating in a niche and at such high level that I could not imagine me outside of those walls. And that's very, very common for, people who have a certain type of expertise, and who are just doing that and doing it with so much intensity that you almost forget what's going on around you. And that's a false belief, because what I want to say to this person is, you're not your title, you're not your job, you're not your role, you're all the skills and the talents that you've developed that help you do this job well. And so in finance, being amazing at analysis and strategic thinking and risk management and stakeholder management, that's not finance skills. These are high value skills that you can apply anywhere. And my coach really helped me translate those skills into transferable skills. And then when I found the opportunity at Apple, how to first convince myself that I can do this, and then tell the story in a way that is also convincing to them. One immediate next step that I would suggest is, again, start paying attention to what it is about this job that you hate. Sometimes it's the boss. Sometimes it's the type of tasks. Sometimes it's the environment or the lack of balance, like what it is exactly that drains that energy. Because sometimes it's not, again, like the skills that I just developed. Like, you love doing that. If only it was in a different context, if only it was in a different industry. And so again, gaining clarity over what it is that actually drains you would be for me the first step.
Yeah, that's so helpful. So many good thought starters there, as you say, that it could be different elements of the job rather than the job itself as well. Okay, listener question 3. I don't feel like I'm living up to my full potential with my career history or my current role. I have some ideas of what I want to do, but they feel unrealistic given my qualifications and skill set. So quite similar. I'm worried that if I quit my current job to pursue one of them, it won't work out or I'll end up not liking it. I can't afford to go down a track of investing more money into something that I won't stick to. How should I approach thinking about this?
Yeah, I hear 2 things. One is a real thing, which is financial risk. And I will, again, never tell someone, just quit, make the investment, and you'll see. But then I also hear a story. And for me, the story is what keeps this person stuck, which is this binary thinking of, I quit or it doesn't work. It's this all or nothing. And obviously, when the option is blow up my life or stay, you will stay. It makes sense, right? But there's a third option. You do not quit now and you test first. Again, only through testing and experimenting and collecting data, start having some clients, whatever that pivot is, that's what will create that confidence. And not only confidence, like actual data, actual outcome, actual numbers.
That's such sound advice. And I think what's so interesting about all of these 3 questions is when I was actually reading them out, I was thinking, oh, these are actually all the same in a way. Like the themes are just so common through all of them, even though the situations are slightly different. So these are not listener questions as such, but I'm going to drop them in now because there's 2 things that I do get asked about a lot. And so I'm interested how you tailor your advice based on what people have going on in their lives. A lot of people think that career pivots are limited to people without kids, mortgages. So for someone who does have these things, let's say kids and mortgages is the 2 most common examples that I get given, and they're longing for a pivot, what advice would you give them?
I want to start by really acknowledging the constraints. kids are real, mortgages are real. And that's why, again, take the leap and just jump and follow your dreams is not going to help these people. I believe that the constraint is not what's stopping people. What's stopping people is this all or nothing, a binary thinking, or the fears and limiting beliefs that we talked about, or the lack of process. Where do I even begin? How do I test? What do I do? Because again, to do that, you do not need to quit your job. You do not need to stop doing what you're doing. Both can happen at the same time. And to be honest, at least from the people I work with, the most motivated people I work with are parents. Not despite the constraints, because of the constraints. And, I teach design thinking, and when people get stuck, when we're trying to creatively solve a problem, what we do is to add constraints. I know that it can sound counterintuitive, but adding constraints actually increases your creative potential. I'll give you a quick example.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I'll ask you to think about as many silver things as you can in 10 seconds. Okay, how many did you get?
3.
Okay. All right. Now, I'm going to ask you to think of as many silver things as you can in your kitchen. How many did you get?
Yeah, I see what you're getting at. I got 6.
All right. So sometimes constraints actually help us go faster, help us remove the noise more efficiently, and be more creative within a certain structure. So I'm not saying constraints are not real. They're absolutely real. And you can solve this problem within these constraints. And most of the time, to be honest, at least with the people I work with, they're way more efficient because of the constraints and way more motivated, to be honest.
But what about people who are thinking, I'm deep into it, so it's somewhat easier to go back into a job that doesn't require too much thought? Because I think it's a very hard thing for people to think about starting something new after they've had a child.
That's where that first step that I mentioned, clarity, is essential and is unique to anyone. So we will start by defining what it is that you need. There is what you want, and then there is what you need. Because without those things that are necessary, this is not going to be sustainable. And as I said, a pivot can take time, and taking that first step is the hardest thing. But we could decide that it's going to be a 2-step pivot. In fact, that was my case. I knew that I wanted to build my own business eventually. But when I looked at what I needed now, it wasn't the right time. And so there was a stepping stone in between. And that was my Apple journey. 5 years later, I gained the skills I needed. And it was also the right time, personally, health-wise, to actually make that jump. So each path is different.
I really like that, because I keep throwing things back at you, but here's another reason we can't. Here's another reason we can't.
But I love it.
And you keep bringing it back to the one thing that sort of sits at the core of it all, which is getting clarity on what you want and what you need. Most people calculate the risk of making a change, and we've talked a lot about that. But what about the cost of not making one?
A lot. and it did cost me a lot. This is such an important question because we do tend to do the math in only one way, which is, if I leave, this is what I'm losing. We do not do the other math or part of the equation, which is, what is it costing me to stay? And the cost is not zero. And not only it's not zero, it compounds over time. And I'll give you some examples of costs that I've personally experienced and that I see all the time. First, just the energy cost. If you just think about the time you spend every day thinking about how you're stuck, ruminating, thinking about it at 2 a.m, feeling drained, not being engaged at work, not being motivated, can you actually try to quantify how many hours that represent in your week? And it's huge. Sometimes it's half of your time, right? Like you're there, but you're not there. So there is that piece. there is related to it the opportunity cost, right? So imagine that time was put towards building what you want. All of that represents a cost as well. And then there is a huge cost, which is the identity cost. Because the more you stay, knowing that you don't want to stay, the more it reinforces the narrative that you're trapped, the narrative that you have so much to lose. And there's the health cost. For me, it was real. It was literally developing an autoimmune disease. And so it's important when you're balancing whether you want to start a process or not, to not only look at the cost of leaving, but also look at the cost of not changing anything. And for me, the biggest one was who I was becoming. And so ask yourself, if I stay in this exact same position 5 years from now, who am I becoming? Not what I'm doing, not what I'm achieving. Who's the person that I'm becoming? And would you be proud of that person?
It actually reminds me of another episode that I did, and she went to college and she studied, and she ended up in private equity out of college. She said she just 2 years in, 3 years in, she took a look and she thought, if I stay in this job, I'm going to end up being the private equity girl. And I never intended or wanted to be this. It's just the job I took out of college. Like, that is not who I want to be. Okay, well, we'll jump into the quick fire questions and wrap up.
I think I want to just reinforce something that I just said that was a big aha moment for me. Is one of the most powerful mindset shifts that I had to go through is understanding that career pivots or job changes are not just job changes, they're identity changes, especially when you've been doing this for a long time and have been praised for it. And until you treat it that way, you can keep solving the wrong problem. It's as important to deeply understand what is driving that career identity. And usually that career identity is built in college and your first years, in your early 20s, right? And for many people, it looks like work hard, get the promotion, get the number of zeros you want on your bank account, and keep climbing. And that usually works for a while. That's what helped people get until that moment when they're like, wait, is this it? Or wait, something feels off, or I'm completely burnt out, or I have no meaning, or I'm demotivated, or whatever that is. Which means that we need to examine that operating system and that identity on which you've run for a long time. And what do you want to replace it with?
Okay, into the quick fire questions. What is a book, a podcast, or resource that's helped shape the way that you think about fulfillment or purpose or your pivot?
Okay, so the first one that comes to mind, and actually was one of the first ones that I've read when I was going through my first pivot and didn't know where to begin, and also informs so much of my approach today, is Designing Your Life by Bill Burnett and Dave Evans. It's out of the Stanford D School, and it's basically applying design thinking principles, which is just how to creatively solve problems and go after opportunities, applied to your life and here your career. And so it really helps me shift from I need to have the perfect plan on paper and be so certain by spending so much time thinking and overthinking, to the only way to actually gain that clarity and confidence is through action. And that action looks like running experiments and then testing and iterating. It's basically launching a product. And you are the product, right? And so build a prototype, test it with real people, get back to data, and iterate before the official launch. And I think it was one of like the big aha transformative books. So I would pick that one.
Okay, that's great. I'll be going home and reading that. And where can people learn more about you and what you do and find the resources that you offer?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, they can find me on LinkedIn or Instagram, Lamiaa Laurène Daif. And then I also share a newsletter twice a month. It's called the Pivot File. And in every release, I share one story of one of my pivots, and then one practical tool. So what it is that they can try right away if they're going through that type of challenge. And so they can find and subscribe on my website, or it's also on LinkedIn. And one thing as well that I have and could be helpful for anyone who felt something in their bodies right now as we're talking is, as we said, the first step is clarity and understanding what's actually stopping you, where the stuckness is. So I've actually built an assessment. It's free. It's called the Career Clarity Assessment. It takes 10 minutes. It's about 25 questions. And at the end of it, you get to know exactly what's your stuck type and a personalized next step and tool that you can put in place right away to start not only understanding where it's coming from, but what can you do to take that first step to get unstuck. So hopefully that's helpful, and they can find it. The link is on my LinkedIn or on Instagram in my bio.
Oh, I really like the sound of that, but I also like the sound of the newsletters. There's some absolutely fantastic resources, and we'll link those into the show notes so that they're easy for people to find. And yeah, I think honestly you sort of answered my last quick question, which was about what people can start to do today to move and build their confidence, because you've just provided some great resources that they can go to. And the Career Clarity Assessment sounds like a really good first and manageable step. Okay. That is a wrap. That was an absolutely fantastic conversation. I feel my brain is just buzzing with all this new knowledge, and I'm really excited for everyone to be able to go and apply this. So thank you so much for your generous time and sharing all the learnings that you've had, not only through obviously your coaching, but all the personal experience.
Thank you so much. It was so fun to do this. And thank you for creating such a beautiful space for these conversations to happen. I wish the Good Shift existed when I was 29 and not knowing where to begin. I see more and more non-linear careers, portfolio careers, which is amazing, which just means, building something that is aligned with who you are at the end. And we keep evolving. We go through different cycles. You mentioned parenting and mortgage and all of that. And so why should we stay stuck in the same way of operating when you're in 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s and so on?
Thank you so much. That was wonderful.